there YouTube, Jared coming at you from Console Killer. Today we're going to be covering a very important topic and one that seems to be giving us a bit of grief recently. And that is picking the appropriate graphics card for your situation. So on the desk in front of me, as you can see, we have a selection of graphics cards from the more basic of the dedicated graphics cards to the higher end side of the dedicated graphics cards. What I also have behind me is various CPUs, AMD, Intel, etc., which some of them will have their own GPUs built in and may be called an APU, as with AMD. Now, I'm going to be essentially dictating over a screen, and I'm going to be taking you through different scenarios of graphics cards and basically, as I said a little earlier, what graphics card to pick based on the game you wish to play. Because recently we've had a couple of people a little bit unhappy because they bought something with like a integrated graphics card, you know, the kind of thing that comes on the CPU, and then they've tried to play Grand Theft Auto on Ultra, and unsurprisingly it won't work. So let's now jump over to my overlord voice self, and we can talk about various situations and what you would use in the situation you're in. Now, I'm only going to cover some games and some graphics cards, but hopefully I'm going to give you an idea of what you need to do to pick the machine that's right for you.
So as you can see on the screen right now, we have a page open for a GTX 1050. We're on a website called notebookcheck.net. It offers comparisons for various different graphics cards for desktops, laptops, and gives you statistics so you know if your graphics card is going to be able to play the game you want to play. So if we scroll down, you will see a bunch of numbers that are all important, but the key thing you want to look at when you get to here, where you see different games. So it won't have every game out there, obviously. It's only going to have a selection, so it may not have the game you want. But one thing it will do is give you an idea, because clearly if your game is, I don't know, the latest AAA and all the really high-end games that it has here have awful frame rates, then you know that it's not really going to be able to play your game. So, for instance, Call of Duty, that's a game that tends to be quite intensive on a graphics card. As you can see, it'll quite happily play on Ultra at 55 frames per second on a 1050, which is really playable. It's completely fine. But then go to something even more intensive, say Battlefield 1. On Ultra, suddenly, when you bump up the resolution, the frame rate's pretty awful. But you go down a bit in resolution, suddenly it's playable. Obviously, these aren't going to be including dropouts, because one thing that graphics cards tend to have is essentially peaks and troughs, the occasional low frame rate when something particularly bad happens, and that could affect your gameplay. But yeah, so that's for a 1050. We'll now switch over to a 1070, and we'll scroll down again. So here's some various games on the 1070. You'll notice that they're different games to what was on the 1050, simply because these are user tested. But if we go down on the 1050 to Watch Dogs 2 and Watch Dogs 2 on the 970, you'll notice that on Ultra at 1080p, the 1070 gets 63 frames per second, whereas the 1050 gets 35. So pretty significant difference there, almost double. So yeah, it's pretty simple actually to check that you've got the appropriate graphics card for what you need. Here we have a 1080 Ti or 1080 Ti, and let's see if Watch Dogs 2 is on here. Let's keep looking. Yeah, there's Watch Dogs 2, and you'll notice that on Ultra at 1080p it's got 93 frames per second, whereas on the 1070 on Ultra at 1080p you're at 63. So there you are. And you might be wondering, well, why isn't there medium and low settings being demonstrated here? And that's because they're irrelevant, really. The graphics card is the high-end graphics card, so they're not going to show you its frames per second on lower settings, because you wouldn't play with lower settings for most of the reasons that you might think. So there you are. That's a pretty simple how-to on how to do it. Now, just out of interest, what we'll do is we'll pop up a 780 Ti, so quite an old graphics card, a few generations back, and we'll see what it has to offer. So, Watch Dogs 2, it doesn't look like Watch Dogs 2 is on here, but let's see, we have Battlefield 4. Let's go to that one. And you see on Ultra at 1080, we're getting 89 frames per second. Let's see if Battlefield 4 is on here. We've got Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 4, there you are. So on Ultra on 1080, on Battlefield 4, 200 FPS on a 1080 Ti, and Battlefield 4 on Ultra on a 780, 89 FPS on 1080p. So there you are. There's those differences. And you have to understand that if you have a lower end graphics card and you try and play a high end or an intensive game that doesn't recommend that card, things aren't going to work properly. You may even not be able to load the game. So keep that in mind when you're purchasing a computer, that you do a little bit of research just to make sure that you're buying the appropriate hardware for what you want to use.
So, I hope that I've given you a fairly detailed idea of what you want to do when you're going to be picking the hardware for your next computer. And you just have to bear in mind that whatever you pick, it will generally have a recommendation for what sort of hardware it needs to run. So if you want to play the latest AAA Ultra game, you're not going to be able to run it on an Intel HD 4000 integrated GPU. You're going to need something like a 1060 or higher even. So bear that in mind, follow the advice that I have given, and give it a go for yourself. Good luck! Oh, and just to say, if you really are stuck, give us a call and we will be more than happy to help you out. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.